I walked into my house after work and noticed something was wrong. My daughter's room was completely empty. My wife said, "She's staying with my mom now." My mother-in-law smiled like she planned it, and my sister-in-law kept stripping the room. They thought I'd accept it. They had no idea what I was about to do. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Darren Pike drove the same stretch of road home every evening, 12 minutes from the south gate of the Riverside packaging plant to the cracked concrete driveway of the house on Clover Mill Road, through a stretch of Fort Wayne suburb that never quite looked different from one season to the next. Same flat lawns, same utility lines running parallel to the road, same gas station on the corner with a broken letter on its sign that nobody had fixed in 2 years. He knew every bend of it. He knew the light at Jefferson that stayed red for 40 seconds and the railroad crossing where you had to slow to 15. He knew this route the way a man knows anything he has traveled so many times it no longer requires thought. That predictability had never bothered him. Darren was 37 years old, and he had built his life the way he built most things, steadily, from the ground up without drama. He had worked the packaging floor for 11 years, rising from a line position to shift supervisor, a job that came with long days but a reliable wage and a manager who left him alone as long as the numbers were right. He drove a gray truck with 200,000 miles on it that he maintained himself in the driveway on weekends, Ava handing him tools she could barely name. He grilled on Sunday evenings. He paid his bills on the first of the month. His life had structure. It had edges he could see and corners he understood. Then there was Ava. His daughter was 8 years old and entirely herself. A person so complete and particular that Darren sometimes watched her from across the yard and felt genuinely amazed that she existed. She had her mother's dark eyes, but his stubborn chin, and she moved through the world with the loud confidence of a child who has never been told she was too much. Her stuffed rabbit, a gray and well-worn thing she named Biscuit, lived on the left side of her pillow every night without exception. Her drawings covered the refrigerator in overlapping layers, mostly animals, with careful handwritten notes beside each one about where they lived and what they ate. She sang cartoon theme songs at full volume during bath time and never once seemed aware that anyone could hear her. The house on Clover Mill Road was small. 2 bedrooms, a cracked porch railing Darren kept meaning to fix, a backyard with a tire swing that tilted slightly to the left. But it was filled with noise and light and the evidence of a child who felt safe in it. It breathed. Marlene was a good woman. Darren had believed that and had not been wrong about it for a long time. They had met at a mutual friend's backyard gathering when both of them were 26, and he had liked her immediately. Her directness, the way she made decisions without hesitation, the way she laughed without covering her mouth. They had been good together in the early years. He remembered those years clearly. The road trips with no particular destination, the shared meals, the particular ease of 2 people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. But Marlene had always been close with her family. She had grown up in a house where the Voss women operated as a unit, decisions made together, loyalty to the group placed above almost everything else. Her mother Colleen called 3 times a week at minimum. Her younger sister Kelsey sent long texts at all hours that Marlene would answer mid-conversation without apology. The family was loud and warm, and they arrived at holidays with too much food and competing opinions about everything. In the early years, Darren had found it charming. He had come from a quieter house, and there was something he liked about the noise of them. There had been a version of Marlene, early in their marriage, that Darren remembered clearly. A woman who held opinions and shared them directly, who disagreed with her mother on the phone without softening the words, who had said once, years ago, that her family could be a lot and she knew it and she was sorry when it spilled onto him. That honesty had been something he trusted. He had built a marriage on the assumption that she would keep being that person. But charm is a thing that requires distance to sustain itself. The visits started the way these things always start, reasonably. Kelsey called one March with what she described as a situation involving her landlord, something about a lease dispute and a roommate who had left without notice. She needed somewhere to stay while she sorted it out. Just 2 weeks, maybe 3. Marlene had already said yes before she mentioned it to Darren. He agreed. 2 or 3 weeks was something he could work with. People go through rough stretches. Family helps. But 3 weeks became 6. 6 became the end of summer. A second bag appeared in the hallway beside the coat rack. Then a plastic tote with a broken handle that no one moved. The situation became a series of situations. The new apartment that fell through, the deposit that disappeared, the roommate arrangement that didn't work out. Each one reasonable on its surface. Each one followed by another one. Darren came home one Thursday evening after a long shift and found Kelsey on the living room couch, remote in hand, television up, watching something with the ease of a person who has decided this is her space. She looked up at him the way a person looks at someone who has just walked through their front door. "Hey," she said, and looked back at the screen. Marlene came out of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. She gave him the quick smile she gave him when she wanted the temperature in the room to stay level. "How was work?" "Long." He set his keys on the counter, looked at the couch, looked at his wife. "How much longer is she staying, Marlene?" "Soon," Marlene said, in the tone of someone who has thought about this less than they should have. "She's working on it." He nodded. He heated a plate and ate at the kitchen table, while the television noise from the living room competed with the sound of Ava's splashing in the bath upstairs. He told himself that soon was a number he could live with, but he was already beginning to understand that the word didn't mean the same thing to Marlene that it meant to him. It was a Tuesday in October. He remembered the day clearly because he'd had union. Walked through at the plant that morning that had put him behind schedule, and he didn't make it home until nearly 6:30. He pushed through the front door tired and carrying the specific flatness of a day that had demanded too much of him for too little result. Ava was on the living room couch, both feet tucked beneath her, biscuit held against her chest, with both arms. She wasn't watching anything. She wasn't reading. She was sitting in that particular way children sit when they're trying to make sense of something that hasn't been explained to them yet. He stopped in the doorway. "Hey, kiddo." He kept his voice light. "Why are you out here?" She looked up at him. There was a pause, barely a second, but a second that held more information than a full sentence. "Aunt Kelsey is using my room." Darren went still. "What do you mean using it?" "She moved her stuff in there. She's sleeping in there now." He walked past the couch and down the narrow hall. Ava's bedroom door was closed. From the other side of it, he could hear a low murmur. Kelsey's voice, a phone call, unhurried. He stood in front of that closed door for a moment, long enough to be sure of what he was hearing. Then he turned back toward the kitchen, where Marlene was at the stove with her back to him, stirring something in a pot. "Marlene." She didn't turn around. "I know what you're going to say. Tell me what happened with Ava's room." Kelsey's back was hurting on the couch. "She needed a proper place to sleep. So you gave her our daughter's room." "It's just for now. Ava can sleep with us in the meantime. She's 8 years old. It's temporary, Darren." The spoon kept moving. "It's not a big deal." He looked at the back of her head, at the way her shoulders were slightly raised, the small, physical language of someone who knows what they're saying isn't right, but has decided to hold the position anyway. He opened his mouth, and then Kelsey came out of the hallway with her phone, pressed to her ear. She passed within 2 feet of him and raised one finger, a single gesture, requesting patience, and disappeared into the bathroom. Darren stood in the kitchen and said nothing. That night, he sat on the edge of the mattress on the floor where they'd made Ava a sleeping spot with a folded comforter and her pillow. He read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through, about a girl who finds a door in the back of a closet leading somewhere else. Entirely, he tucked the blanket up to her chin and kissed her forehead. "When do I get my room back?" she asked. He smoothed her hair back. "Soon," he said. "That's what Mom says too. It'll happen, kiddo. I promise." She looked at him with careful dark eyes, assessing, patient, deciding to believe him. Then, she closed them. He lay awake that night for a long time. The room was wrong in ways that went beyond the logistics of it. Ava's breathing on the floor beside the bed. Marlene asleep with her back to him. The soft sound of the television still running in the living room past midnight. He stared at the ceiling and thought about what a room actually is. Not the walls or the window or the square footage. A room is where a child goes to be herself. It is where her things live and where her private world begins. You don't take that from a child for convenience. You just don't. It took 10 days for the lock to appear. In those 10 days, Darren watched the transformation of what had been his daughter's room with the specific, controlled attention of a man cataloging damage. Kelsey rearranged the furniture over 2 evenings, dragging the small bookshelf from the east wall to the corner by the window and pushing the little reading chair out to the hallway because she didn't need it. She packed Ava's art supplies, the tin box of colored pencils with the butterfly on the lid, the fat markers, the pad of watercolor paper, into a cardboard box and set them on the top closet shelf, where Ava's arms couldn't reach. She took down the drawings from the corkboard above the desk and left them in a pile on the floor without particular care. Darren found the pile when he went looking for Ava one afternoon and realized she was standing in the hallway, just standing there looking at the closed door. He brought it up with Marlene that evening. She's moved Ava's things. Pack them away. Ava can't get to her own art supplies. Kelsey will be gone soon, and everything goes back. When? You keep saying soon, and I keep watching it get more permanent. Marlene set down the glass she was holding and turned to face him. She had the expression she wore when she thought he was making something larger than it needed to be. You're catastrophizing, Darren. I'm watching our daughter get pushed out of her own room, he said quietly. That's not catastrophizing. That's just watching. She didn't answer. The lock appeared on a Thursday. A simple hook and eye latch, the cheap hardware store kind, screwed into the door frame on the outside. Darren stood in the hallway and looked at it with his arms at his sides. He found Marlene in the bedroom. There's a lock on the outside of Ava's door. Marlene looked up from her phone. She just wants some privacy. It's a lock on the outside. It keeps Ava out. It keeps her daughter out of her own room, so Ava doesn't wander in and bother her. That is Ava's room, he said. The only person that lock should be keeping out is people who don't belong in there. Marlene closed her eyes briefly. I'll talk to Kelsey. But she didn't. Or if she did, nothing changed. He watched Ava after that with the close attention of someone tracking something that matters. The singing during bath time stopped sometime in the second week. The refrigerator drawings, she had been adding a new animal every few days, stopped appearing. She no longer asked to kick the soccer ball in the backyard after dinner. She ate with her eyes mostly on her plate, and when Kelsey or Colleen spoke to her, she answered with the minimum number of words. She was folding herself smaller. A child learns to take up less space when less space is what she has been given. One night, Darren was passing the bedroom when he heard it. Just a soft sound, barely audible through the door. He pushed it open quietly. Ava was lying on her side on the folded comforter, facing the wall. Her shoulders rose and fell with slow, careful breaths. She was trying to cry without being heard. That particular kind of crying that is worse than the loud kind because it means the child has already learned that some pain should be kept quiet. Darren sat down on the floor beside her. He put his hand on her back. Hey, I'm here. A moment passed before she turned. Her eyes were red and still wet. She told me I can't go in anymore, Ava said. She said it's her room now. She said if I knock again, she'll throw my stuff in the trash. Darren kept his hand on her back. He kept his face level and his voice steady, though what was happening behind it was neither of those things. That room is yours. Everything she told you is wrong. She has a lock. I know. Ava looked at him. There was something in her expression that went beyond confusion, beyond simple hurt. It was the look of a child who is beginning to understand that adults can fail the basic job of protecting them. That the people who are supposed to fix things can choose, instead, to allow them. Why does a mom make her stop? She asked. He did not have an answer for that. Not one that would have helped. I'm going to fix this, he told her. Okay, I'm going to fix this. She nodded. She pressed closer to him, and he stayed on the floor beside her until her breathing steadied and slowed into sleep. Sitting there in the dark with his daughter's warmth against his side, Darren felt something settle inside him. Not the hot, immediate version of anger that rises and passes. Something colder and more durable. A decision that didn't need a name, just a direction. He had been patient. He had told himself the situation would resolve. He had trusted that Marlene would see what was in front of her and choose the right thing. He had been wrong about that. And now he understood, with absolute clarity, that no one in this house was going to fix things except him. Colleen arrived on a Friday evening with 2 suitcases, a large cardboard box of kitchen items she said she might as well bring, and the energy of someone who believes they are arriving not as a guest, but as a correction. She moved through the front door of the house on Clover Mill Road with the practiced ease of a woman who has walked into other people's spaces her entire life and never once considered that her presence might not be an improvement. Darren had known it was coming. Marlene had mentioned it earlier that week in the offhand way. She had begun to deliver information she knew he wouldn't like, briefly, without eye contact, framing it as a settled fact rather than something that could still be reconsidered. Her mother was going through a difficult stretch. She needed a change of scenery. It would only be for a little while. Darren had said nothing. He was learning the particular discipline of saying nothing when there was nothing useful left to say. Colleen was in her early 60s, a compact woman with close-cut gray hair and a voice calibrated about 20% louder than whatever room she was in. She had opinions about everything and an inability to hold them back. Within the first hour of her arrival, she had rearranged the spice rack from Marlene's alphabetical order into what she called logical groupings, surveyed the living room furniture, and announced the couch should face a different wall, and come out to the back porch where Darren was standing with a cup of coffee to tell him that the grill was rusting. He looked at her, then at the grill, then back at her. "Evening," he said. She nodded once, as if making a point, and went back inside. With Colleen and Kelsey both occupying the house, a new system of authority installed itself over the following days. It hadn't been planned. It had grown the way invasive things grow, finding available space and filling it. The two of them began making decisions about Ava that had never been theirs to make. What she ate at dinner, whether she had had enough, when she was allowed to be excused from the table, whether the clothes she chose for school were appropriate or needed to be reconsidered. Colleen had a philosophy she called structure. She used the word constantly. It justified interrupting Ava mid-sentence to correct her posture, telling her to slow down when eating or hurry up when Colleen was waiting, sending her to wash her hand a second time because the first pass hadn't been thorough enough. Kelsey backed her up without exception, as if backing Colleen was the factory setting of their relationship. Darren watched from across the dinner table and kept his hands flat on his thighs. It came to a head on a Wednesday evening. Darren had brought home a piece of chocolate from his coat pocket, a single square wrapped in foil, the kind he had been bringing Ava since she was small enough to only hold one. He passed it to her across the table. Just a small thing, a habit, the kind of gesture that builds meaning slowly over years. "Don't spoil her," Colleen said from across the table. The words came without pause, without invitation. Children that age shouldn't receive treats for nothing. Darren looked at her. She's 8. Exactly. Old enough to understand that things are earned. She doesn't have to earn something from her father. Colleen made a sound through her nose. Patient, practiced, the sound of someone who has managed difficult conversations for decades. "You're too easy on her. She needs to learn that the world doesn't hand things out." Kelsey glanced up from her plate. "She needs to learn she's not the center of everything." The table was quiet. Ava had stopped eating. She was looking at her fork. Darren put the piece of chocolate on her plate. "Ava," he said, "you can have it." Colleen exhaled through her nose again. Kelsey looked at Marlene with the expectation of backup. Marlene was looking at her dinner. That was the pattern that troubled Darren more than anything Colleen or Kelsey said or did on their own. Marlene's silence. She sat at that table every evening while her mother and sister redirected her daughter, and she said nothing. Not once. Not a quiet correction or a gentle change of subject. She moved through it as if it weren't happening, a witness who had decided, for reasons Darren couldn't fully put a name to, that this was a situation she would not insert herself into. He noticed that Marlene said nothing. Not to her mother, not to her sister, not in defense of her daughter. She moved through the house like a satellite pulled by the gravity of whatever Colleen and Kelsey decided, adjusting her behavior to match theirs without appearing to notice she was doing it. She was present at the table, present in the room, but never quite present in the conversation when it mattered. When Colleen criticized something Ava did, Marlene nodded. When Kelsey corrected the girl's speech or dismissed one of her stories, Marlene smiled faintly and looked at something else. Darren watched it most carefully of all, because whatever Colleen and Kelsey were doing to Ava, Marlene was allowing. And there is a difference between the person who causes harm and the person who decides not to stop it. That difference had a name, and he had been careful not to say it out loud yet. But he was thinking it. He raised it at night, in a low, careful tones a couple uses when they don't want to be heard through walls. Your mother lectured Ava at dinner again. Marlene lay on her back, looking at the ceiling. She doesn't mean anything by it. It doesn't matter what she means. It matters what she does. You always make it bigger than it is. I'm watching our daughter shrink at her own dinner table, he said quietly. That's not big or small. That's just what's happening. Marlene turned on her side. A long pause. I'll talk to her. You keep saying that. She didn't answer. He lay in the dark afterward, listening to the house. The television's still on in the living room past 11. The murmur of Colleen and Kelsey's voices. The sounds of a home that no longer entirely belonged to the people who owned it. He thought about the word Marlene had almost used earlier that night. She had started to say in her own, before catching herself. Her own what? Had Colleen's presence made this house feel like Colleen's territory, even Marlene? He turned that question over for a long time and did not find a comfortable answer. The Saturday it happened was early spring, cold when the wind picked up, almost warm when the sun held steady, a high pale sky with fast-moving clouds. Darren had gone into the plant for a half shift, covering for a colleague named Phillips who had been out sick 2 days running. He didn't mind the weekend hours usually, but that morning he moved through the work with a low, nameless unease he couldn't trace. Something sitting wrong at the back of his mind. He finished early and didn't wait around. He stopped at the deli near the highway exit and picked up 2 sandwiches, turkey on wheat for himself and the small grilled cheese Ava always ordered on Saturdays, and drove home thinking about whether they could get to the hardware store that afternoon for the hinge on the back gate. He heard it before he reached the front door. Not loud, just the specific, low sound of a child crying. That particular frequency that cuts through everything else that a parent's whole system is tuned to find from any distance. He had the key out and the door open in under 3 seconds. The hallway. Ava was on the floor, sitting against the wall with her back against the baseboard, her right arm cradled in her left hand. Her face was wet. She looked up at him with the expression of a child who has just been told that what happened to them doesn't count. Kelsey was standing in front of the bedroom door. Her arms were crossed. The door was open behind her. Darren set the bag on the floor. What happened? His voice was completely flat. I told her not to come in, Kelsey said. She doesn't listen. He moved past Kelsey and crouched in front of Ava. He set his hand gently on her knee. Hey, look at me. She looked up. Where does it hurt? She held out her right arm. There was a red mark running from just below her elbow toward her wrist, raw and bright against her skin. Impact skin, the kind that comes from a body hitting a hard edge. He touched it lightly with 2 fingers. She flinched. He saw the flinch and kept his face neutral because she was watching his face. Does it hurt a lot? She nodded once, pressing her lips together, trying to hold the next cry behind them. The trying to hold it, went somewhere in him that would not let go. He stood back up slowly. He turned to Kelsey. She was still in the doorway, still with her arms crossed. She had the specific look of someone who has done nothing wrong and is mildly inconvenienced at being asked to explain themselves. You pushed her, he said. I moved her out of my doorway. She fell because she grabbed the frame. She's 8 years old. This is her room. It's not her room, said with the flat certainty of someone stating a fact about the weather. She knows that. She just wouldn't stay out. He looked past Kelsey then, because he heard movement at the far end of the hall. Marlene was standing at the kitchen doorway. She had a dish towel in both hands. She had been standing there long enough to have seen what she was seeing. She was looking at Ava on the floor. She was looking at the mark on Ava's arm. She was looking at her sister in the doorway with crossed arms. And she was not saying a single word. That image, Marlene standing in the kitchen doorway with that dish towel, looking and not moving, would stay with Darren longer than anything else from that day. Longer than the mark on Ava's arm. Longer than Kelsey's crossed arms. It was the clearest thing that happened in that house in months, and it was made entirely of silence. He picked Ava up off the floor. She put both arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder, and he carried her to the kitchen and set her at the table. He ran cold water over a cloth and held it against her arm, gently, steadily. He kept his voice low. "You're okay," he said. "I've got you." She held on with both arms and didn't let go for a long time. He sat with Ava for 10 minutes. He unwrapped the sandwiches and set hers in front of her and got her a glass of juice and told her to eat. She was still sniffling, but she picked up the sandwich. That was enough to tell him she was going to be all right. Children are resilient in ways that are both comforting and heartbreaking. He told her he'd be right back. He walked down the hallway to the open bedroom door. Kelsey had retreated inside. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, on Ava's star comforter, now buried under Kelsey's things, scrolling on her phone with her thumb. The leisure of someone waiting for a situation to resolve itself without their participation. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "That room is Ava's," he said. His voice was level, completely level. "You put your hands on my daughter." "I moved her out of my doorway," Kelsey said. "She fell because she grabbed the frame on the way out. There's a mark on her arm. Kids get marks. You are not going to tell me about my daughter's body." Still level, still quiet. "Pack your things. You need to leave this house." She stared at him. "You're joking." "I'm not. You can't throw me out of Marlene's house. This is my house. You put your hands on my child. Collect your things and go." He walked back to the front door and opened it. He stood beside it without moving. He did not slam it or gesture theatrically. He simply stood beside an open door, indicating a direction. Kelsey came down the hallway and stopped when she saw him. Her jaw shifted. "You are completely unbelievable. Get out. You always overreact. That's your whole thing, Darren. You always make everything a crisis." He said nothing. He did not move. Then Colleen appeared from the living room. She had been close enough to hear all of it and had decided the moment had arrived for her involvement. Her expression was the one she wore when she had concluded something was her business. "You do not speak to family that way," she said, with the authority of a person who has issued this correction many times before. Darren turned to look at her. He kept his voice at the same level it had been for the last several minutes. "You've been in this house for 2 months. You've been telling my daughter when to eat and how to sit and what she's allowed to have from her own father. You watched your granddaughter get put out of her bedroom and said nothing. And today, Kelsey pushed her to the floor." "I did no such out," he said, and pointed to the door. "Both of you." The voices went up then. Colleen's carried the particular outrage of someone who had never in their adult life been told to leave a room. She spoke about family, about what family meant, about how you didn't put family out, about how Darren had never understood the first thing about any of it. Kelsey added her own current, cutting in and out at different angles, using words that were meant to land. Darren heard all of it. He let it pass through him without catching. Then Marlene came out from the kitchen. "Darren." Her voice was tight. "Please stop. Just please." He looked at her. He did not speak right away. There was something specific he needed to understand from her face before he said anything. "They have to go, Marlene. You can't just—" "Kelsey put our daughter on the floor." He kept his voice low enough that only she could hear the full weight of what he said next. "You were standing in the hallway when it happened. You saw Ava sitting on the floor with a mark on her arm, and you said nothing." Marlene's jaw tightened. Something shifted in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the shadow of its outline. "She didn't mean to hurt her," Marlene said. "That word again." "Accident," he said quietly. Is that your position? That your sister pushing your daughter was an accident?" Marlene looked at the floor between them. "If that's how you see this," Darren said, "then you need to decide which side of this door you're on. Kelsey and your mother are leaving. The only question is whether you're staying here with your daughter." The hallway held its breath. Colleen made a sound. Kelsey said his name in a tone designed to intimidate. Neither of those things mattered. The only thing that mattered was Marlene. He watched her. He watched the calculation happening behind her eyes, could see it moving there, the weighing of options, the arithmetic of costs. She had been running that calculation her entire adult life, always in her family's favor. She was running it now. A long moment passed. Then Marlene turned and walked toward her mother. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a declaration. She just took 6 quiet steps across the hallway and stood beside Colleen, and that movement said more than anything spoken in that house in months. Darren stood at the open front door and watched them collect what they needed. Coats, bags, Colleen's purse from the hook by the door. He watched Marlene follow them out without looking back at him. He closed the door. He locked it. He stood in the quiet hallway for a moment, alone in it. Then he walked back to the kitchen. Ava was still at the table. She had finished most of her sandwich. She was watching him with serious, careful eyes that looked older than 8. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He sat down across from her. He reached across the table and covered her small hand with his. "It's going to be," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he meant it completely. Patricia Gould had her office on the 4th floor of a downtown building that smelled of old carpet and dry-cleaned suits. She ran it with the efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years watching people make the wrong decisions under pressure and had learned to speak in direct, unornamental sentences because of it. She had met with Darren 3 times before the first hearing. Each time she had been direct in a way he appreciated because it matched how he thought. "You're going to walk into that courtroom and want to react," she told him at their last meeting. "Your wife is going to say things that aren't true. Her attorney is going to frame what happened in ways designed to make you look dangerous. Your job is to sit there and let the documents do the talking. You are a reasonable man with reasonable responses to an unreasonable situation, and that will be clear if you stay out of the way of it." "I can do that," Darren said. "I know you can," she said. "That's why I'm telling you what to expect, rather than spending this meeting coaching you on how to behave." She held his gaze for a moment. "If something she says makes you want to respond, press your feet flat against the floor and breathe. That's all." The morning of the hearing, Darren dressed in the dark blue suit he had bought for his father's funeral 7 years earlier. It was slightly short in the sleeves, and the collar had always fit tighter than it should, but he left the top button undone, and it was fine. He drove Ava to the neighbor 2 streets over before the school bus came. He told Ava it was a work meeting, which was not far enough from the truth to count as a lie. She gave him the look she gave him when she suspected he was simplifying something. Then she kissed his cheek and went inside. The morning of the hearing, Darren dressed in the dark blue suit he had bought for his father's funeral 7 years earlier. It was slightly short in the sleeves, and the collar had always fit tighter than it should, but he left the top button undone, and it was fine. He drove Ava to the neighbor 2 streets over before the school bus came. He told Ava it was a work meeting, which was not far enough from the truth to count as a lie. She gave him the look she gave him when she suspected he was simplifying something. Then she kissed his cheek and went inside. He sat in the truck for a moment in the neighbor's driveway. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of gray that presses down close. He thought about what Patricia had told him and about what he knew to be true, and he thought about his daughter kissing his cheek just now without knowing the full weight of what this day was. And then he started the truck and drove. The courthouse was gray limestone, the kind of building designed to communicate the weight of what happens inside it. The hallways smelled of old paper and floor wax, and the accumulated presence of other people's difficult days. Darren walked through them beside Patricia, who moved through the building with the ease of someone for whom this was unremarkable routine, exchanging brief nods with clerks and bailiffs. He sat at the plaintiff's table and looked across the room. Marlene was already seated. She had dressed carefully, a gray blazer, her hair pinned back, makeup precise enough to communicate control without appearing rehearsed. She was sitting very straight. She did not look at him when he came in. She looked smaller than he had expected. He had anticipated the version of her he had last seen walking out of the house on Clover Mill Road, certain, moving, in motion. What he saw instead was something more contained. She had prepared a story for today. Whatever she had told herself in the weeks between then and now, she had organized it into a version she intended to tell. Marlene's attorney, a man named Forsyth with a gray pocket square and a habit of pausing mid-sentence as if adding weight to his own words, opened by characterizing Darren as a volatile and controlling presence in the marital home. He used the word aggressive 3 times in the first 5 minutes. He described the evening Darren had asked Kelsey and Colleen to leave as a threatening display that placed both mother and child in immediate fear. He suggested that Ava's welfare was not secure in Darren's care. Darren pressed his feet flat against the floor beneath the table and breathed. The judge that morning was the Honorable Arthur Webb, a heavy-set man in his mid-60s who moved his pen across his documents with the unhurried attention of someone who charges his concentration carefully. He listened to Forsythe's opening without visible expression. He wrote several things down. Then Forsythe said it. His client was requesting full custody of the minor child, Ava Pike, with supervised visitation for the father pending a behavioral evaluation. The words moved through Darren's chest like something cold. He felt them land. He sat still and let them pass. Then Patricia Gould leaned forward and placed her folder on the table. "Your Honor," she said, "we have quite a bit to say about that." The documentation had been gathered carefully, over weeks, in the quiet, deliberate way Darren did most things. Not with a clear endgame in mind at the start, but because something in him had understood early on that precision and evidence matter more than volume. He had taken the first photographs on his phone the night Kelsey moved Ava's art supplies to the top shelf. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing at the time. It had felt like the instinct to record something before it was gone. He had photographed the room then, and again when the furniture changed, and again when the lock appeared. Each photograph was automatically dated. Patricia Gould walked the court through it with the patience of someone laying stones across water, one solid placement at a time. The first set of photographs showed Ava's room as it had been. Stuffed animals on the shelf, a star rug, drawings on the corkboard, biscuit on the pillow. Then the series from 2 weeks later. The shelves bare of Ava's things and packed with Kelsey's bags and clothes. The rug gone. The corkboard empty. In the final photograph, the hook-and-eye latch mounted on the outside of the door, its cheap metal hardware clear and undeniable against the white-painted wood of the frame. Judge Webb's pen slowed over his notes. The second exhibit was a printed record of text messages sent from a family tablet to Ava's contact on the same device. There were 3 of them, sent across a 2-week period. The first read, "Stay out of my room." The second, "I told you not to come in here. Next time your stuff goes in the trash." The third, sent 2 days before the incident. "That door is locked for a reason. Stop trying the handle." The judge looked at those for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something. The third piece of evidence was a report from Dr. Nina Howell, the pediatrician at the clinic where Ava had been a patient for 5 years. Darren had taken Ava in on a Monday, 3 days after the incident, framing it as a general wellness visit. Dr. Howell had examined Ava's arm, documented a contusion consistent with impact against a hard surface, and noted in the patient statement section the child's own account of what had happened. The report was clinical and careful, and it used the word pushed once. The room was very quiet. Then Patricia set the final exhibit on the table. She allowed a moment of silence before speaking. "Your Honor, the minor child provided a recorded statement to a family welfare counselor 10 days ago. With the court's permission, a small speaker was placed on the table. Someone pressed play. Ava's voice in that courtroom was small and perfectly clear. Darren had heard that voice every day for 8 years. He knew its rhythms, its pauses, the specific way it went slightly higher when she was uncertain. He pressed his feet flat against the floor. The recording had been made in a welfare counselor's office with a soft chair and a box of crayons on the side table. A gentle woman who asked questions the way good counselors ask children questions, slowly, without pressure, without suggesting any particular answer. "Can you tell me what happened to your arm?" the counselor asked. "She grabbed me and pushed me," Ava said in the recording. "I fell against the door frame." "Did that hurt?" "Yes." "Was anyone else there when it happened?" "My mom was in the hallway." "What did your mom do?" A pause, longer than the others. The particular silence of a child deciding whether to say the true thing. "She didn't come," Ava said. "She just stood there." The speaker was turned off. The courtroom remained completely still for a moment. Darren stared at his hands flat on the table. He did not let his expression change, but something along his jaw tightened once involuntarily, and it took him a full breath to release it. Across the room, the careful, composed look Marlene had carried in that morning had cracked along one edge. Not dramatically, not with visible distress. Just a single visible shift the expression of someone whose prepared story has met the story that evidence tells, and discovered the two are not the same. Her attorney leaned over and spoke to her quietly. She looked down at the table. Judge Webb removed his glasses, cleaned them deliberately with the cloth from his breast pocket, and put them back on. He looked at the documents before him for a measured time. Then he looked up at the courtroom. He had heard what he needed to hear. Judge Webb did not rush. He went back through the evidence himself, asking Patricia Gould and Forsyth several clarifying questions, reviewing the documentation in his own time. He asked whether the text messages had been sent from a device registered to the household. He asked whether the child's mother had been made aware of their content. He read the pediatric report a second time and asked about the timeline between the injury and Dr. Howell's examination. Colleen was in the gallery, 2 rows behind Marlene's side. She had chosen her seat with the focused attention of someone who expects her proximity to matter. When the judge reviewed a section of Patricia's summary that described the minor child as having been systematically displaced from her own bedroom by an unauthorized occupant, Colleen leaned forward. That is not an accurate description of. Judge Webb looked up from his papers. He did not raise his voice. "Ma'am," he said, "you are seated in the gallery of an active proceeding. You have not been called as a witness. You are not a party to this case. If you speak again without invitation, you will be removed from this courtroom. I will not repeat that." The gallery went completely still. Colleen sat back. Her face held the particular expression of someone to whom this kind of thing has genuinely never happened before. When Judge Webb spoke at length, it was in the measured, careful cadence of a man who understood the weight of the words he was choosing. He said that the evidence before the court told a story that was troubling not in its complexity, but in its simplicity. An unauthorized adult had been allowed to displace a minor child from her own bedroom. That same adult had communicated to the child in writing that she had no right to her own space. And that adult had ultimately used physical force against the child, resulting in a documented injury. He said that the mother's failure to intervene, documented both in the child's own recorded words and in the absence of any protective action following the injury, was a matter the court viewed with serious concern. The court finds, he said, that the respondent failed in her fundamental responsibility to protect her child's safety and well-being within the marital home. Primary physical custody of the minor child, Ava Pike, is awarded to the petitioner, Darren Pike, effective immediately. The respondent will have scheduled visitation, the terms of which will be determined at a subsequent hearing pending a welfare evaluation. Marlene said something, very quietly. The word what? Her attorney's hand was immediately on her arm. "Mrs. Pike," Judge Webb said, looking at her directly, "the court has reviewed all available evidence and heard from both parties. This is not a close decision." Her expression did not collapse. She was not someone who fell apart in public. But the story she had walked into that courtroom with was no longer intact, and it showed in the set of her mouth and the downward shift of her eyes. Patricia Gould placed her hand briefly on Darren's forearm after the gavel came down. "Well done," she said simply. He nodded. He sat for a moment before standing, letting the weight of what had just been decided settle properly. For him, and more importantly, for Ava. He looked across the room at Marlene one time. She was listening to her attorney with her head slightly down. She looked like someone who had arrived somewhere they had not planned to arrive. He felt no satisfaction in that. He felt no pity, either. He felt the clear, settled recognition of a thing being exactly what it was. He picked up his folder. He stood. He walked out. He picked up his folder. He stood. He walked out. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the noise of the building returned. Footsteps, a distant phone, someone speaking at a clerk's window down the corridor. Darren walked through it without stopping. He had expected to feel more in this moment. Some release, some surge of something. What he felt instead was very quiet and very steady. Like the moment after a long piece of work is finally done and what remains is just the work itself, solid and complete. The sky outside was overcast, the air still holding the last cold edge of late winter. He stood on the courthouse steps and breathed it in. The ordinary smell of a city afternoon, real and plain. Then he took out his phone and called the neighbor where Ava was waiting after school. "She's fine," the neighbor said. She's been helping sort the garden seeds. Do you want to talk to her? Yeah, Darren said. Yeah, I do. The house on Clover Mill Road got itself back. That was how Darren thought about it. Not as something he did, but as something that was already underway the moment the door had been closed and locked and the television in the living room had stopped being the last sound he heard before sleep. The house was quiet in the right way now. Settled. It had its shape back. The first thing he did after the court order came through was stand in the hallway with a flathead screwdriver and remove the hook-and-eye latch from the outside of Ava's bedroom door. He unscrewed the mounting plates from the doorframe, dropped the entire assembly into the kitchen trash can, and stood there for a moment in the hallway listening to the house around him. The screw holes were barely visible. He'd putty them later. He pushed the door open and stood in the doorway. The room had been stripped of itself. Kelsey had taken her things when she left, but what remained was a space that had been lived in by the wrong person. Rearranged, impersonal, smelling faintly of someone else's habits. The star rug was gone. The corkboard was bare. The shelves had been cleared and not restocked. He heard footsteps behind him. Ava came and stood in the doorway beside him, looking into her room with that careful, considering gaze she gave to things she was deciding about. They stood together in the doorway for a moment, father and daughter, looking at the same space and both understanding what it needed. We could do whatever you want with it, Darren said. Whatever you want it to look like. Ava looked around slowly. Can we paint it? What color? She thought. Yellow, but soft. Not too bright. We could do soft yellow. She turned to look at him with the first fully bright expression he had seen on her face in weeks. Can we go get the paint today? They went that Saturday morning, just the two of them, the gray truck pulling into the hardware store lot before 9. Ava moved through the paint aisle with the seriousness of someone making a real decision. She held swatches against her arm to judge them in the store light. She rejected 2 yellows as too sharp and 1 as too green before finding the right one. A warm, muted tone the label called morning mist that looked, against the white shelf, like the color of something just beginning. She put in the card. They spent the afternoon on the room. Darren taped the baseboards while Ava organized the new shelf brackets, trying each one in position before settling on the arrangement she wanted. They painted with the radio on low, Ava handling the roller on the lower sections, Darren cutting in along the ceiling and trim. She narrated her opinions on the progress as they worked. Which wall was looking best, which section needed a second coat, whether the window wall might look slightly different from the others. He agreed more than he disagreed. By evening, the room smelled like paint and fresh starts. He put her books back on the shelves in whatever order she chose. The star rug had been packed in a box in the garage, somehow surviving the whole thing, and he found it and brought it back. Biscuit returned to the left side of the pillow. She put a new drawing on the corkboard, a detailed red fox with notes beside it about what foxes ate in winter, and stood back to look at it with visible satisfaction. Better, she said. Much better, he agreed. Life returned to its rhythms. The same morning schedule. Homework at the kitchen table. Soccer practice on Tuesdays. Hardware store on Saturdays. Sunday grilling when the weather held. He fixed the back gate hinge. He fixed the cracked porch railing he'd been putting off for 2 years. He went at the tire swing on a quiet Sunday afternoon, adjusting the hang angle that had always tilted it slightly left. Ava came out from the porch while he was working, holding an apple with both hands. You need to go more to the right, she said. I've got it. He worked for another minute. She watched. Still crooked, she said. He stepped back and looked at the swing. He looked at the angle of the rope against the branch. He pressed his lips together. A little, he admitted. She grinned, the full, unguarded grin, and he pulled her into a sideways hug with one arm, and she leaned into it and laughed, and the sound went out into the afternoon yard and stayed there. He thought, in that moment, about how easily that sound could have been taken from him. How close things had come to a version of this story where Ava woke up somewhere else, laughed somewhere he couldn't hear it. The thought didn't land with panic. It landed with something heavier and slower, a deep, clear understanding of what had been at stake and what he had done to protect it. He didn't stay in it long. There was dinner to make and homework to check and Tuesday practice to plan for. He got back to it. One evening some weeks later, Ava came looking for him in the kitchen after dinner, still in her school clothes, biscuit tucked under one arm out of old habit. She crossed the kitchen and put both arms around him. Not the passing, distracted hug of a child already moving toward the next thing. A real one, the kind where she pressed her face against his side and held on. "Thank you," she said into his shirt. "For what, kiddo?" She was quiet for a moment. "For not letting them take my room," she said. "And for everything after." He put both arms around her. He held on. He didn't try to find the right sentence for what moved through him because there wasn't one, and because the moment didn't need words. It only needed what it already had. The collapse of the arrangement at Colleen's house was not dramatic. That perhaps was the most telling thing about it. Marlene, Colleen, and Kelsey moved into Colleen's house in the subdivision on Fort Wayne's west side after the departure from Clover Mill Road. For a while, by what Darren understood from things Ava mentioned without being asked, the three of them maintained the collective certainty of people who believe they have been wronged by someone else. That kind of certainty requires an external cause to stay unified. Without Darren's house as territory and his resistance as opposition, the dynamics that had held them together began to do what unsupported structures do. Colleen had always had opinions. Without Darren and his household as a shared project, those opinions turned inward. She had views about Kelsey's life choices. She had views about how Marlene was handling the custody situation and its aftermath. She had views about the timeline, the decisions, the future. She expressed them freely, as she always had, except now the audience was smaller and the exit options were fewer. Kelsey, for her part, had never been good at receiving criticism from anyone, including her mother. The small house with its three strong-willed personalities began to fill with a different kind of tension. The friction of people who had been held together by external pressure and who discovered, once that pressure was gone, that they did not actually get along the way they had believed. Darren heard some of this from Ava, who spent weekend visits there, and told him what she saw honestly, the way children report information when they trust the person receiving it. He never asked her to tell him anything. He never framed her observations as anything other than what they were, a child describing her weekend. What she described, over the first several months, was a tense house. Arguments she didn't always understand. Kelsey and Colleen going days without speaking after bad ones. Marlene mostly staying in her room. Kelsey moved out in the fall. Ava mentioned it on a Sunday evening with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for most observations. Aunt Kelsey left. She got an apartment somewhere. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. After that, it was just Marlene and Colleen. And Colleen, without her daughter as an ally, was a different kind of presence. More concentrated. The opinions that had previously been directed outward turned fully inward. And the two women who remained circled each other in a house that had never had quite enough room for both of them. Ava mentioned once that her mother had started taking long evening walks, sometimes not returning until after dinner. Darren understood that. Sometimes a long walk is the only available option. What he noticed on the visitation handoffs, the brief overlaps at the door, the occasional school event, was that Marlene was trying. She was present with Ava, on time, engaged. Whatever else had fallen away, she was not choosing to lose her daughter, and he registered that without comment. He kept the handoffs neutral. He kept his voice minimal and his face professional. He did not create conflict, and he did not invite familiarity. But he saw it sometimes. A particular look in Marlene's expression in the moments after she had said goodbye to Ava and was turning back to her car. The look of someone sitting with consequences they have had a long time to examine and still cannot make peace with. The gap between who she had believed herself to be and what she had done in that hallway was a specific kind of distance, and Darren had lived long enough to know it didn't close easily or quickly. He did not take pleasure in it. That was true, and he checked it honestly. But he also did not pretend he didn't see it. What had happened. Regret was real. It belonged entirely to the person carrying it. It was not a debt that someone else owed you the courtesy of receiving. The family she had chosen over her daughter had dissolved under its own weight. The things she had protected had not protected her back. That was the sum of it. Life had a precision about these things that no one plans for. There were people who suggested, in the year that followed, that Darren might eventually soften his position. His colleague Hammond at the plant said it one afternoon over lunch, not unkindly, in the easy way of a man who believes time dissolves most things. She's still Ava's mom, Hammond said. Worth keeping some kind of door open. His uncle Carl said something similar at a family gathering that fall, using the language of peace and moving on, suggesting that carrying hard feelings was its own kind of weight. Let it go, Carl said. For your own sake. Even Patricia Gould mentioned, at their final meeting, that outcomes like this one had a tendency to complicate over time. People change, she said simply. Worth keeping in mind. Darren listened to all of them. He appreciated the care behind the words, even when the words were slightly off the mark. But there was something all of them were, in their different ways, asking him to forget. Not simply to stop dwelling on it. Not to forgive in the practical sense of ceasing to be consumed by it. They were asking him to pretend that what had happened in that hallway had not revealed something real about Marlene. That her silence had been an accident. That the walk toward her mother's side had been a momentary lapse rather than a fully conscious choice made with complete knowledge of what she was choosing. He had examined that moment enough times to know what it was. He was not angry. He checked that regularly, in the quiet evenings when Ava was asleep and the house had that particular settled quality of a day ending well. He did not feel the corrosive, burning version of hurt that requires constant feeding and damages everything around it. What he felt was something different, a settled, clear knowledge of who Marlene had shown herself to be when it actually counted. The kind of knowledge that doesn't arrive with drama. It just arrives, and it changes what you can trust someone with. That was not punishment. That was not bitterness. It was the reasonable consequence of evidence. He rebuilt the routines of his home the way he rebuilt anything after a disruption, starting with what mattered most and working outward. Breakfast at the same time. Homework at the kitchen table. Soccer on Tuesdays. Hardware store on Saturday mornings. Ava almost always coming along because she liked choosing parts even when she had no idea what they were for. He puttied the screw holes in her door frame until they were smooth and invisible. He fixed the porch railing. He leveled the tire swing until even Ava agreed it was straight, which was not a concession she made easily. The house became what it had always been supposed to be, a place where the refrigerator held too many drawings, where the kitchen smelled like something cooking on a Sunday, where a child felt safe enough to be loud. That seemed like a small thing until Darren thought about how close he had come to losing it, and then it didn't seem small at all. It seemed like the only thing. Ava grew. The songs came back during bath time, different songs now, from a show at school, same volume as always. The refrigerator filled with new drawings. The animal portraits became more detailed and meticulous, each one with careful research notes, because Ava had decided she was interested in wildlife biology as a career and was treating this interest with the seriousness it deserved. She made a close friend named Iris, and they developed a flashlight signal system across the backyard fence that communicated things Darren was probably not meant to fully understand. When Ava asked about her mother, and she did, as children do, working patiently to understand where all the pieces fit, Darren answered honestly and without editorializing. He told her that her mother loved her, which was true. He did not say anything that wasn't true. He never spoke badly about Marlene in front of Ava. Not once, because he believed that was a relationship Ava had the right to build and navigate on her own terms. That was not his to influence. But he also did not pretend that things were other than they were. He did not dress the truth in softer language to make it easier to carry. He believed his daughter deserved to grow up knowing that truth was worth protecting even when it was uncomfortable. That Real love shows up in action. That silence in a hallway when someone needed you is itself a statement. Some of that was too much for her now. She would grow into it. He would be there when she did. Darren never reached out to Marlene. Not once. Not to smooth things over. Not to offer the kind of tentative reconciliation that people attempt when they can't sit with the rawness of a clean break. What had happened had happened. The moment in the hallway had been real. The choice she had made had been deliberate. He had watched it in real time. Some things, when you see them clearly, cannot be unseen. That was not a wall built in anger. It was a line drawn in full understanding of what it marked and what it was protecting. The house on Clover Mill Road with its fresh yellow paint and its reorganized shelves and its fixed railings and its level tire swing was not a monument to anything. It was just a home, a real one. One with edges he could see and corners he understood. One where the sound of his daughter singing badly in the bath at full volume was the most important sound in it. He had drawn the line. He had made sure no one crossed it again. And in the quiet, ordinary, daily work of that, the breakfast at the same time, the homework at the table, the hardware store on Saturday mornings, he had exactly the life he had fought for, which was the only life that had ever mattered.